Realm presents Born to the Blade, Episode 3.
Chapter 1. Chris. The antechamber in the Kuloi embassy stood draped in peacock greens and gilt-kissed blues in constellations of silvery damask, all tasseled with symbols that Chris did not recognize. To Chris's surprise, only a nominal number of weapons were on display, and there was little indication of the island's mercantile history. No statement pieces. Instead, they saw portraits of Toifei and its myriad inhabitants, images of the other warders all smiling, their eyes luminous with the future. It made Chris's heart seize with want. One day, perhaps, they'd be on these walls too, recognized as a friend, a peer. "You honor me, Warder Conte. I believe
Ojo,"
the older man corrected them. He wore formal attire this time, a caftan belted at the waist, shawl over one muscular shoulder, trousers metallic copper and delicately brocaded, a vest that reached to his hips. And the ceremonial dagger, of course, worn against Ojo's belly. The hilt was exquisite, monarch bone scrimshaw, lined with obsidian and veined with amber.
"Call me Ojo. There is no need to stand at attention. We are friends, are we not?"
Ojo laughed. His voice was warm and rich and honeyed, as much a weapon as the blades rusting against his spine. Maybe even more, Chris thought, studying the Kuloi warder's regal features, the practiced smile. Somewhere in their mind, a ghost of Alex was shaking their silver-haired head, mouthing warnings. Be wary of kindness, Chris. But anyone who was anyone, even the dullest child in the smallest village in the worst slums of Murtika, knew that the point of Toifei was to establish peace among the nations. So what if Ojo intended to use Chris against the other warders? Ultimately, this would all be in pursuit of the greater good. More important, Chris knew exactly what they had to do. They'd gone over this plan too many times. Rumika would not side with any of the other factions. Rumika would serve as the axis of all political interactions, neutral and impartial. Let the other warders, with their glib tongues, their loaded discourse, their endless posturing, do their worst. Rumika would not fall. Chris would not fall. Besides, they had no plans to do anything until they'd at least listen to Michiko's appeal. A little conversation couldn't possibly hurt anyone. "I am honored you'd call me friend. Overwhelmed, even. It's such a generous thing to say." Chris bobbed a quick bow, sharpened their smile. "Especially given the fact that we'll have to duel soon, and I will thoroughly trounce you in front of an audience of our peers." Ojo's expression faltered, and Chris couldn't help but grin as their counterparts spluttered through niceties, starting and stopping halfway through each new line, before finally surrendering to an unabashed guffaw. "I believe in honesty," Chris declared breezily, earning another round of laughter.
"You do Rumika proud,"
Ojo said, once he again had enough breath to speak, his smile infectious. "I hope to do more still, my new friend. Regarding our possible arrangement," the warder interrupted them with a flap of his hand.
"Oh, later, and only once you've ascended to your office. It wouldn't be right to force you into a commitment now."
"But I am authorized."
"And I am old and sentimental."
Ojo's attention drifted from Chris, the humor draining from his face. Something like grief flickered, just for a moment, in the dark wells of his eyes.
"I believe in protocol. Tradition represents the bones of our civilization. Without orders, without rules, without regard for system, we'd be no better than animals. I would not have you speak to your government without anything but a gentleman's agreement to show."
"You're too kind." Chris followed the man's gaze over the slant of their shoulder. Their eyes grazed over a myriad of beautifully calligraphed posters. The notices had become a familiar sight over the last week. Toifei was practically drowning in them thanks to Bologna's efforts. "So, are you excited for the baby shower, then? I can't imagine what Bologna might have planned. Something lavish, I'm sure."
"Oh, most definitely. She's Lavinia's little tiger cub, after all. Anything less, and she stands at risk of offending all her previous selves.
Ojo strolled up to the posters and began very slowly peeling them from the wall. He did not crumple them, as Chris thought he would have, but instead halved them again and again, all with the focus of a man walking a tightrope. Warder Kante, did something happen between you and Warder Kirikos? If this is a case of that Murtican halfwit treading carelessly over a sensitive matter, I'd more than happily serve as your proxy and tell her where she should shove.
In case you have forgotten, Saruden, you are here as a representative of Rumika. This is not about town politics. This is about the world.
Chris fell silent. Saruden, the most formal of honorifics. You used the word for strangers. People you couldn't stomach to trust. Ojo carved a hand through his graying curls, expression flickering between possibilities. Chris knew enough about statecraft to read the variations, all of them intended to reassure, none of them honest. Yet Chris saw no impure motive behind the changes, only exhaustion. And despite the earlier admonishment, their heart ached in reply to Ojo's fatigue.
I apologize.
Ojo struggled with the words for a breath before he slotted a kind smile into place, the posters stashed into a pocket.
Age has a way of transforming us into our worst selves.
No, Ame Kante. Ame, a step below Sovereign Lord. Hopefully Ojo would understand the depth of Chris's horror at his disapproval. I'm the one...
You flatter an old man with your willingness to take his sins onto yourself.
Ojo bowed his head, cutting Chris off.
Let me apologize. I misspoke. I presumed to lecture you when it wasn't my right.
But you were right, Ame Kante. I spoke out of turn. In fact, I did more than speak out of turn.
Warder.
Ojo said so very softly.
Enough.
Warder, Chris thought, warmth blooming under their skin. He called me Warder. Had Chris been older, wiser, less ambitious, less easily blindsided by such flattery, they might have thought harder on Ojo's choice of words. But as it stood, they had little chance.
We've known each other for a week, but already you've exhibited more generosity than I've seen in decades.
A crack in Ojo's facade again, a flicker of something like agony, but Chris couldn't tell for sure.
Is this customary of Rumika? To be so open and compassionate towards strangers? It seems like such a dangerous thing.
I cannot speak for all of my nation. Chris splayed long fingers across the bridge of their sternum. But where I hail from, at least, we believe that there is no future without trust, no opportunity for growth unless we're willing to approach the world from a position of compassion. It opens one to the risk of injury, true, but the rewards have been great. I suppose the answer's yes. It is customary for Rumika to care. Ojo held Chris's gaze for a space of heartbeats, expression illegible, before at last the mask once more. And the warder sagged. Yes. What?
I am certain this will inevitably cause some measure of controversy, but I am decided. The answer's yes. At least unofficially speaking. You will need to be formally appointed as the Rumican warder before we can make public the announcement. But as far as I am concerned, the answer's yes. Kulo will stand with Rumika, and I with you.
Blood thundered in Chris's ears. This wasn't the answer that they'd been expecting, wasn't even the outcome they'd been hoping for. For all their brazenness, Chris had anticipated more weeks of discussion. It was all they could do not to lunge at Ojo and embrace the other man. And the trade agreement? Done. Not trusting their ability to speak, Chris thumped a fist against their chest and bowed deep, joy thrumming through their bones. Days from their first duel in the gauntlet, and already Chris had negotiated a deal to change the world. This was a sign. This was proof. Rumika, disregarded and ignored for so long, would finally take its place in the world. Chris! They spun on their heel, a hand darting to their saber at their hip. The blade rattled in its sheath, the sound loud in the hall, outside of the Kuloi embassy. It was so different here. Marble instead of decadently thick carpeting, and everything made to echo. At least no one else but Chris's assailant was within earshot. Who? Adechike? What are you doing here? An indignant look flitted across the youth's features. Adechike clacked his jaws shut, stiffened, brow furrowing. Evening poured its light across the hall, a bluish thing that rendered the curling hall in soft shadows. Outside the windows, Chris could see the krill, pennies, that was what they were called on Toifé, gather into ribbons of flashing opalescence, readying for the night. What do you mean, what am I doing here? I said I'd wait for you. You... yes. Chris released their grip on their blade, disoriented still from their recent triumph. I know you did, but I thought you meant... When most people say they'll wait right there, they don't actually mean it. I'd have thought you would... I don't know. I thought you would have gone to the tea house or retired to your chambers or at least found a book to read. You... Adechike's frown deepened. He steepled his fingers at his waist, cocked a disappointed look at Chris. I said I would not leave this spot until you were done. Chris gave up. Most people are not quite as literal. Most people are terrible friends, then. His expression cleared. Really, though, did you honestly expect I'd leave you here? Alone? To deal with whatever fallout might have taken place? What kind of a person do you take me for? A normal one? A smile stole across Adechike's features, delicate as a bow, and spread until it overtook the entirety of his face. Almost against Chris's will, they began to laugh, the events of the last week tumbling together, knifing into a sharp, breathless pleasure. For a moment, that was all they could do. Laugh with the abandon of a child while Adechike looked on in mounting concern. This really was everything that Chris had craved. Success as the aspirant warder and a friend like Adechike, someone they could trust, someone with whom they'd one day share the history books immortalized as heroes. Chris? They flicked a hand up. It's fine. It's fine. I don't think that was that funny a joke. Adechike extended a lean arm. Today, he was dressed casually, as though en route to an informal appointment. A saffron-colored caftan trimmed with silver, matching trousers, a drapery of blue-green silks worn diagonally along a shoulder, their glimmering surfaces subtly brocaded with Adechike's many achievements. But who knows with you strange Rumikins? Had anyone else said those words, Chris might have tensed, might have thought twice about placing their loyalties in the cup of Adechike's palm. But the warmth in his voice, that glorious baritone, there was no mistaking it for anything but affection. Anything but a faultless kindness. Chris clasped a hand around Adechike's arm and just below the elbow, and tugged their friend into an embrace. The warder-to-be let out a startled yip, a quick bark of laughter, before he allowed himself to be crushed against Chris's chest. Guessing it went well with Ojo? The two separated. Incredibly, said Chris. Better than I could have possibly hoped. Better than I dared dream, really. I'd expected... They gestured at the air. You expected... Adechike prompted, head tipped at a quizzical angle. Actually, Chris flashed their best smile and draped an arm around Adechike's shoulders. Leaning close, they dropped their voice into a conspiratorial murmur as they led their friend from the embassy. I'll tell you the rest of the story at the tea house, but it will be fantastic. Rumican airstone technology will launch Kulo into the future. The things I've seen, Adechike, the things our scientists do, you wouldn't believe any of it. Willing, will bring about an industrial revolution. I want you to imagine... Chapter 2, Cassia.
Were you expecting someone?
Cassia, sandal dangling from the arch of a slim foot, set her jaw atop the cup of her palm and shook her head. Unlike Penelope, Cassia was spare and slender, brushstroke lines accented with taut muscle. She favored lighter weaponry, martial skills that capitalized on momentum, surprise. Penelope disapproved, of course, but Penelope disapproved of everything that the younger Vanian enjoyed, including Cassia's new haircut. Frivolous, she called it. Too much softness, too much everything. But Penelope was, as battle mistresses often were, out of touch. Twirling a quill in her other hand, Cassia drawled,
No.
The older Vanian let out a low, irritated sigh. Cassia had come to recognize the noise as Penelope's way of saying she'd had just about enough, was ready to retire either to the gymnasiums, a hot bath, or Ojo's company. Maybe some combination of the three. Cassia had heard all the gossip. That sigh almost meant more paperwork to shovel through, more long-winded legalese to hack into palatable summaries, more forms to fill out, more forms to check, more everything. But Cassia was used to that. Besides, none of it was actually hard. A cup of tart plum wine, some light music, the promise of fresh appetizers, the things the proprietor could do with fish cartilage, mothers above. From the kitchens of the tea house, and suddenly it'd be all over. Cassia sighed. The problem was convincing Penelope to get on with it.
Most junior warders would already be on their feet and halfway to the door, a blade in their hand, prepared to defend their superior officer against whatever threat lay outside.
Cassia didn't miss a beat.
Most junior warders do not serve a decorated battle mistress.
Penelope crooked a wry smile and said nothing, only swept across her office to open the door. Outside was Bologna Avitas. Every inch the effete aristocrat that she was, hair worked into an outrageously impractical coif. With some disdain, Cassia took in Bologna's choice in footwear, 4-inch high heels, no counterbalances in sight. So typical of those Morticans. "Yes," said Penelope. "Mistress Penelope Kirkos, scourge of the Battle of Telnesia, the Emerald of Death, Lady of the 17...
Speak faster."
Cassia barely swallowed her laughter in time. Bologna tripped into a pose of Vanian genuflection, flawless except for the fact that she forewent the surrender of arms. Cassia saw Penelope's lips curl infinitesimally, a look of cool disdain flash across her features. "I am here, warder, to extend an invitation to the most joyous of occasions, an event like no other." Useless, Cassia thought half-pityingly, her attention straying from the embarrassing tableau to the curving window that replaced one of the office's walls. Penelope had been so particular about its installation. It had to be a single pane of glass, perfectly clear, and thick enough to withstand a collision with a monarch. The specifications had driven so many contractors to madness. As memory teased a smile from Cassia's lips, the clouds pulled from the silhouette of an approaching ship. Her breath caught. Could it be? She'd been wrong before. The ramwolves that had colonized Toifé were larger than anything Cassia was accustomed to. For months, she'd mistaken the slow-moving giants for ships, their antlered heads almost resembling ramshackle masts. But no, this was something else. This was... The tug of longing crescendoed into impatience. Yes, there was no mistaking that shape for anything else. The daggered prow, the telltale ridging of vertebrae along its highest mass, the trophies hanging from its hull like the hairs of some fantastical beast. No other nation but the Herok would tolerate such a ridiculous design, and no Herok ship was as ridiculous as the Blue Fang. Anton was finally home.
While I appreciate you extending this invitation, Miss Avidas, I'm afraid I must decline. I have far too much to do before...
But, Mistress Kirkos, your attendance is necessary. Cassia narrowed her eyes, shaded her gaze against the afternoon glare. Her eagerness dimmed into worry. Something was very, very wrong with the Blue Fang, but she couldn't yet tell what. Had Anton tussled with too many rivals again? Did he join another stupid monarch race? She had so many questions, none of which would be answered until Bologna took her leave. Cassia flicked an irritated look at the door, even as the Mertican delegate slid a glossy envelope from a pocket. Penelope sighed. At least she wasn't the only one growing weary of their guest, Cassia thought ruefully.
Why is that?
Because, Madame Kirkos, this cannot take place without your presence, said Bologna, dipping into a bow. You are the guest of honor. You are the reason for its conception. You see, the event in question is your baby shower.
Baby shower,
Penelope repeated, tone flat, while Cassia stared in horror. Vanian culture had no equivalent. Such occasions were pure Mertican bombast, and the idea that Bologna might impose such frippery on the battle mistress was, well, unthinkable. No, not unthinkable. Cassia decided. That was Martika for you, perpetually convinced that their mode of civilization was the status quo, no room for nuance or personal identity. Penelope made a strangled noise low in her throat.
Vonians do not have baby showers.
Bellona visibly brightened. That's why you'll have one. At the precise moment Bellona made that arrogant announcement, the blue fang drifted from the clouds, revealing what Cassia had suspected. It was damaged, but not in any way she'd seen before. The stern was almost entirely missing, a ragged mess of broken timber. It looked like something had taken a bite out of the ship. Something enormous.
Mist Fiend,
Cassia whispered.
You have got to be kidding me.
And Bellona, oblivious to everything but her own excitement, said, It'll be the party of the century. Chapter 3. Ojo.
Every day, this place feels more like a tomb.
Ojo weighed the thought in his head as he allowed his eyes to roam, the candlelight writing flickering shapes into its corners, like ghosts of 1,000 dead countrymen. If he allowed himself, Ojo could almost hear the screams again. Not that they were ever absent. Not that he could forget. Not now. Not ever. Amayakante, it's your turn. He shook his head and looked back to Adechike, the boy's round face framed in the palest gold, his mouth bent. Without thinking, Ojo stretched across the playing board and tousled the understudy's locked hair, eliciting a squawk but no reciprocated action. For all the indignity that Adechike exhibited, however, Ojo could tell that none of it was meant. All of it was in service of play, of endearing himself to the public, and not, Ojo thought, for any mercenary reasons either. Adechike, for good or for ill, genuinely desired the friendship of those around him.
Yes, I'm sorry. Anyway, you were telling me about what Warder Den said.
Warder Den. Adechike's face broke into an exultant smile. If only Chris could hear that, they wouldn't sleep a wink tonight. Actually, that might be a terrible idea. They'd probably drag me to the tea house again. Shun's done something new with their dragon fruit wine, and Chris is fascinated, as always.
As always.
Ojo moved a piece absently, eyes drifting again to the window. The last ships had docked for the evening. There would be no more traffic until the dawn. The quiet, despite all the years Ojo had spent on Toifei, never ceased to startle the warder. Monarchs flitted silently between jags of floating rock, some overgrown with moss and new life, others still bearing the remnants of what had been. Ruined architecture like pleading hands stretched up to the indifferent stars. As for what Warder Den, that smile again. Warm, innocent of anything but that rare and exquisite joy. Had Ojo the means, he'd harvest some of that bliss, bottle it, keep it on his desk, on those days when he needed reminding that tomorrow was still a dream that persisted for some. Said, I am not certain about the particulars. We had a lot to drink, and the conversation went everywhere. But as far as I can tell, it isn't just one breakthrough. No, it's a system. See, really, it's pure genius. The Rumicans have figured out not only how to domesticate the local fauna, but how to adjust the elemental composition of their krill. And now, there's more airstone than ever in the bones of their native wildlife. Of course, that wouldn't mean anything if they hadn't also figured out a way to amplify the potency of the airstone molecules. I'm not even sure how it works. It's amazing. Cold rippled through Ojo's veins.
Could you repeat that?
Warder. Adechike leaned forward, concern emblazoned on every line of his face. Damn it. Ojo had miscalculated. Under that saccharine exterior was a razor wire of a mind, impossibly sharp. Adechike was, if not the brightest, then one of the brightest candidates that Kulo had ever produced. And with that magnetic personality of his, he might become one of their nation's most influential warders. But what was the point of contemplating Adechike's future when there was a chance that there might not be a future for any of them anyway? Nothing to look forward to but loss. Kulo's identity disassembled, discarded in favor of whatever country saw fit to collect the detritus of the coming catastrophe. In a few generations, Kulo might not even exist as a memory. It's nothing. You were saying? Uncle. After his introduction to Penelope, Adechike had insisted on being better at the use of honorifics so as to ensure that Ojo, now in the wane of his long career, would never be starved of the respect he deserved. He demanded that right, in fact. To hear Adechike revert to something affectionate, it was a clear indication of how upset the boy felt. "But I can tell you're unhappy. Please. You ask that I see you as family, and I do. And at the risk of sounding contemptuous of your desires, there is no world in which I would not put my family first. I cannot keep babbling about a drunken conversation with a peer when you're clearly distressed. It's unthinkable. Uncle, please, tell me what's wrong." Ojo swallowed his despair, coerced a smile into place.
"It's the baby shower."
That caught Adechike off guard. "The baby shower, sir? I thought that would be a joyous event for you and Penelope."
"Yes."
Ojo stared at the game board, exhausted. He was suddenly sick of subterfuge and lies, of all these layered conversations, these endless games, of hoping, of being disappointed. Had he not performed to the best of his abilities? Had he not been faithful? Why did he have to stand trapped at these crossroads, doomed whichever way he turned? What had he done to deserve this? And Penelope?
"Penelope is leaving."
Adechike's hand flew to his mouth. Oh, I hadn't even... I am sorry. Amekante, I didn't even think... of course, that was obvious. I apologize. I was being insensitive. Despite himself, Ojo laughed.
No, you're right, Adechike. If there's anyone who should feel sorry, it's me. Penelope is a married woman."
His laughter swelled at the youth's look of horror, barely constrained by protocol.
No, it's not like that. Penelope's wife is aware. In fact, Samil's been the one pushing for a child, encouraging us to have a child.
Ojo chuckled.
Yes, it's about as awkward as you'd expect. Pleasant, but awkward. The three of us have known one another for a very long time. So long, in fact, that Samil has offered me as a stud to some of their peers.
Having finally found his voice again, Adechike said, "You feel guilty?"
"Yes, it's disrespectful to Penelope, to her culture. We'd known from the beginning that I was nothing more than a diversion, a comfort while her wife was away. Even if she weren't married, there was no way there would be a future between us. She is a Vanian. I am not. They do not join in matrimony with men, and for all that they might pursue external distractions, they are, how shall we say, culturally and contractually monogamous."
Warder Kante, are you in love with her? Ojo flinched.
"In my own way, perhaps. Either way, I am ashamed. I am old enough that I should be wiser than this, old enough to be more gracious about the inevitable. I should be overjoyed for Penelope, but I am not. And the baby shower, it is a cruel reminder of both my inadequacies and my loss."
None of this, Ojo thought to himself, was a lie, even if none of it was entirely accurate either. Better that Adechike believed that Ojo was a soft-hearted fool than be suspicious of Ojo's intent. He and Chris were too close for the old warder to risk transparency. A regretful situation, but there was nothing to be done about it. More important things were at stake. He watched Adechike's face, tracing the changes in expression, the way the youth processed this new data. How strange it was to see all of a person's emotions written so plainly on their skin. Had he, too, once been so open? Amekante. Adechike picked through his next words with the care of one navigating a field of broken glass. Whatever you need in this time of difficulty, let me say that I am here for you, and that if you require companionship or a trustworthy ear, someone to speak to, even in the dead of night, I will be happily in your service. I wish I had wisdom to offer, but given the disparity between our ages, I'm afraid there is little else I can give. He paused. But I can cook, too, magnificently, in fact. If you tire of Toife's interpretation of our motherland's cuisine, I'd be more than happy to prepare you something. You've not lived until you've had one of my desserts.
Yeah, make sure that Shun never hears you say that.
Ojo exhaled slowly. He'd succeeded at distracting Hidechike. His triumph tasted like ash on his tongue, but Ojo said nothing of his unease, only smiled and listened as his young charge continued to chatter about nothing at all. Chapter 4. Bellona. Worthless, Bellona thought. They were all worthless. Every last one of those simpering, soft-bellied, sniffling fools. If they'd expected to cultivate her favor, well, that certainly wasn't about to happen. Who did they think she was? Another aristocrat with 1,000 lifetimes of comfort behind? Please. The more she thought about the idea, the angrier Bellona grew. How dare those little sycophants, the hangers-on who dreamed of Murtican children, think that they could earn her favor with nothing but words? Hollow, meaningless words, dripping with false promises. There were so many of them. As many as the faceless idiots who'd hoped that good fortune might drift from Bellona like so much dandruff. She snarled as she pricked her fingertip for the upteenth time and sucked on the bleeding skin. She'd show them. Moonlight filled the ballroom, deserted, save for the mountains of tinsel, the half-finished ice sculptures, the garlands of crystal that still needed to be strung in the rafters. Before morning came, Bellona would also need to set the tables, prepare the bouquets, calculate the distribution of party favors. If only Hylas wasn't such a waste of skin, they'd at least have the correct number of souvenirs to distribute among the guests. And the caterers. Empress undying, the caterers. For all the public's glorification of Tuafei's cuisine, for all the good things that Bellona had heard bantered through the tea rooms and the embassy, she couldn't abide by their food. So much fish, so much fermentation, flavors so intense that they'd linger for hours regardless of how much wine Bellona drank. How could anyone stand such an assault on their palate? To make matters worse, none of the caterers would even consider accommodating Bellona's myriad suggestions on how to improve upon their dishes. Why, she'd never know, but such was life outside Murtika, she supposed. Bellona pinched her temples and rubbed circles into the flesh, willing the burgeoning migraine to recede. She was so tired. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept for any reasonable amount of time. But she had promised Penelope that it would be a celebration to remember, a gala event worthy of the battle mistress's storied history. Bellona could not give up now. Especially given everything that Bellona had heard. For all that Vanya might make overtures at respecting Murtican authority, you'd have to be blind to Miss Penelope's personal contempt for Lavinia. If Bellona could just get around this, establish herself as someone different, someone more pliable and less adversarial, someone not dissimilar from a friend, or at the very least a colleague with whom one might consider building a rapport. If she could do that, everything else would fall into place. Movement flickered at the edge of her vision. Bellona shot a look toward the double doors, catching sight of a familiar figure. Michiko stood in the gap, wan and listless. No doubt she was sneaking back to her quarters after another night in the tea house, accompanied by that idiot Chris and their entourage of sycophants, every one of them as guileless and embarrassing as that Rumican imbecile. At least those rallying around the Kuloy youth had a sense of taste. Hidechike, weak as he was, boasted of achievements that would make even a Murtican proud. Chris, on the other hand, possessed nothing but a reputation for reckless behavior. The thought of the Rumican aspirant twisted in her belly. "Oda," Bellona snapped, causing the other girl to jump. "Where are you going?" I'm going to bed, I suppose. Good evening, Bellona. Well, your manners appear to have retired ahead of you. You seem to have forgotten all necessary formalities." Bellona laid down her work. "I apologize. It is late." Michiko crept closer, but would not cross the threshold into the ballroom itself. Her hair hung in a tangle of shadows over her sharp face. Bellona couldn't recall the Kakute representative looking so bedraggled. She'd need to have a word with her superior tomorrow, discuss the importance of maintaining appearance regardless of the hour. If Murtika was to have the respect of the world, its colonies and their respective dignitaries would need to be faultless. This was unacceptable. "I didn't think," Michiko began. "That is the problem with the Kakute. You don't think. You trust too much in the advice of those who came before you. You need to look forward, not backward. That is why— Bellona stopped herself. That is why your country belongs to Mertica. Though Bellona had not spoken the words aloud, their echo still resonated in the air. While Michiko searched for an answer, the young Mertican palmed her face and wondered how much time she would have tomorrow to sleep, or, more realistically, apply enough makeup to conceal her exhaustion. Eventually, she realized the silence had persisted far longer than decorous. She looked back to Michiko to see the girl still rooted in place, head bowed, eyes 1,000 miles from the conversation. So, will you come help me with the baby shower? Bellona demanded, more testily than she'd intended. Not that her ire wasn't undeserved. Michiko had had her chance, and this restless quiet of hers was nothing if not an unattractive look. There's so much left to be done. I have every confidence that I will complete this labor, but help would not go unappreciated. I can't. Michiko wrapped her arms around herself, nails biting into her flesh, her grip white-knuckled. I have to go. I am so very deeply sorry, but circumstances— Bellona said. So Lavinia has spoken to you, then. I should have known that was the case. Now I should apologize to you. It's late, as you've said. Yes, of course. I just wasn't certain if you had clearance. Of course I have clearance. Lavinia tells me everything. I am, after all, a right-hand woman. Or would be, she corrected herself dutifully, once the warder understood the magnitude of Bellona's abilities, and how useful she could be to the cause. But ignore me. Again, I'd like to offer apologies for the lack of forethought. I am ashamed. Go rest, Michiko. You will need all your energy to fulfill your tasks. Michiko bowed with her customary elegance. As you will it. Indeed. Bellona looked over the battlefield of her labors, expelled a faint sigh. There was so much more to be done. But it would be worthwhile. She was certain of that. More than anything else. You might think that I'm being unnecessarily harsh sometimes, I understand that, but I do genuinely wish the best for you, Michiko. For you and for Kakute. If you work hard, one day your children will be born on our soil, and who knows, if you are diligent and true, perhaps you will be reborn as a Mertican someday, gifted with the ability to see how far you've come from your peasant pasts. The Kakute junior delegate said nothing for so long that Bellona wondered if she might have overwhelmed the other woman, and she had half risen from her place on the floor when Michiko finally spoke, her voice so quiet that it almost lost itself in the hiss of moving lace. I thank you for your generosity, but at this point in my life, this humble servant cannot possibly see how any of that may happen. Chapter 5. Ojo.
Bellona has outdone herself.
The smile surprised Ojo with how readily it manifested. Despite the grief lying leaden in the pit of his stomach, he couldn't help but feel a thrum of excitement. Penelope had not requested he absent himself from the debacle, although they'd both joked about how it might be a favor instead. She'd asked for him. After all the words they'd shared, she'd asked for him. A final courtesy, perhaps, or an apology for that wretched evening in her bedchambers? Ojo wanted neither to be true. He studied her face. The Vanian battle mistress was impossible to read. Few gave the warder enough credit. Certainly her combat prowess went unquestioned. There was no one alive who would dare downplay Penelope's achievements in that area. Even Lavinia had nothing but a grudging respect for the older woman. But so few understood just how accomplished Penelope was at diplomacy, how gifted she was at using the inflection of a smile to alter a discussion. Ojo, however, was aware, and for that reason, he found himself unable to truly relax.
I won't lie,
he said, reaching up to brush fingers across the frothing of seed pearls and lace dangling from the doorway. It wasn't dissatisfactory work, in any shape or sense. Bellona was Mertican, after all. Her people did nothing halfway. But the effusive delicacy of it all seemed ill-suited for a woman like Penelope.
I'm slightly afraid of what's going to be inside the ballroom.
Whatever it is, it'll be lovely, I'm certain. Penelope was dressed serviceably, with armor beneath her tunic, sword at her back.
You're being very generous to Murtika, my dear. You mistake me, Ojo.
Her smile, as always, filled his world and eclipsed all else. Damn it all. Adechike might have been right, after all.
I said it'll be lovely. I never said it would suit my tastes. War, for example, can be beautiful, but most would claim otherwise. And haruspicy is an art of its own. I'm told that there are competitions where the aesthetics of entrails reading are judged by a jury of peers. It is a matter of perspective. And what is your perspective on this? This will be a gaudy, garish, glamorous, and utterly heinous affair.
Penelope winked at him.
But the food, I imagine, will at least be palatable.
Penelope was right. The ballroom was transformed. The ceiling was frescoed with billowing silks, complex floral arrangements, all threaded with firefly glows. The tables were festooned with dioramas, porcelain cavalry, whalebone soldiers, and wireframe ships, monarchs in miniature, all coming together in battle, while villagers made of salt shakers and pepper shakers watched on. Beautiful people, some slim-hipped and dark, others pale and voluptuous, swanned through the ballroom, carrying silver trays laden with hors d'oeuvres. There were murals hanging from every wall, and Ojo heard Penelope swear softly, even as the battle mistress's shimmering doppelgangers emerged from the milling guests. Here was Penelope as she stood on her wife's ship after the two had taken down a mist fiend with no help but their own hands, armor tattered, blood ribboning from the corner of her smirk. Here was Penelope in full battle dress, moments before she led her unit to victory. Here was Penelope as a child of 15, fresh from her first kill and achingly beautiful. Every triumph of Penelope's long life incarnated into a company of ghosts. Ojo couldn't tell if it was bladecraft or women in costume. The apparitions organized themselves into two lines and struck proud salutes.
Oh, dear.
He heard Penelope sigh, half laughing. Before he could weigh the decision thoroughly, Ojo reached for her hand, fingertips grazing against her knuckles. Penelope glanced at him over the slant of her shoulder. Smile courteous, and gently, without so much as a flicker of expression, moved out of his grasp. Yes, he had forgotten again. Just for a moment, he'd lost sight of the fact that he was nothing more than a resource, a diversion. Was even less than that now. Whatever he shared with Penelope was over, no thanks to his own sentimentality. Ojo inclined his head and said nothing, held his smile like a shield instead, even as Bellona emerged from the thronging crowd. The young Murtican parted her arms like a queen welcoming the peasantry to one glorious day in her home. Warder Kante, Warder Kirkos, we of Toifé welcome you. Bellona bowed low, only to stutter through her genuflection, stumbling sidelong. Ojo caught her before she could fall.
Easy, child. Are you...
He searched Bellona's countenance. This close, he could see what he'd missed before. Under a layer of powders and rich hues, shadows bruised the valleys of Bellona's face. Her eyes were red-veined, heavy with fatigue.
When was the last time you slept?
Bellona squinted at Ojo's face. Last week? I've had naps.
What were you thinking? I know that your health is Lavinia's responsibility and not mine, but I don't think that I am overstepping my authority when I say that this is ridiculous. You cannot do this to yourself.
In my past life, with no small amount of effort, Bellona pushed from Ojo's arms and dusted her tunic, careful to pick imaginary lint from the expensive fabric, before finally directing a withering look at the man. Her eyes raked across him from temple to toe. She sneered, and with a jolt, Ojo realized where he'd seen that expression before. It was a perfect replica of Lavinia's own sneer, contemptuous and cold. In my past life, I once survived 2 weeks with no sleep. A Murtican soldier does not know fatigue. A Murtican... She swayed. Penelope strode forward, interrupting Bellona's tirade, a palm slanted upward.
A Murtican general would know that it is customary to drink with their Vanian counterparts, and I do not see a cup in your hands, Bellona.
The two women regarded each other for a breath. Penelope's gaze cool, Bologna still sleep-hazed and indignant. Then the latter broke and dipped her head, mumbling apologies. Penelope flashed Ojo a victorious grin as she was led away into the crowd, but try as he might to conjure some fiction of happiness, Ojo found nothing but dust to give. Chapter 6. Chris. There needed, Chris decided, to be an award for those who could restrain their laughter. Some special event that allowed the public to properly venerate those of dignity, discretion, and diplomacy. Why? Because Chris was certain they'd win. They swallowed another pull of their pomegranate rum, even as Cassia pinched the bridge of her nose.
For the last time, Anton, what happened to your ship? What didn't happen to the ship?
Anton dropped into a battle stance, body low, arms held wide. Before anyone could say a second word, the Herat captain had freed his sword. 3 strokes of the serrated blade and silver burst across its length, almost in tandem with Cassia's horrified shriek.
What didn't happen to my ship? Oh, darling, your hair would turn white if you knew. There I was, mothers use your bones for their cups. Anton, what do you think you're doing? Enough with the blade crafting, there are civilians here. This is not a coliseum. Anton, are you listening to me? Put that, my beautiful cactus of the blue skies, my luminous star, the light by which I pilot my humble life, I know. But trust in your loyal servant. Have I ever let you fall? So, as I was saying, there I was. You're avoiding my question. No, I'm being an exemplary entertainer and regaling young Chris with stories of heroism. There's a difference and a fair amount of alliteration.
Chris hid a laugh behind their raised hand and allowed their gaze to drift while Anton and Cassia bickered. The two were clearly lovers, for all they might pretend otherwise. But Chris knew how to be discreet. They slouched back against the bar, sparing the room a quick inspection. Michiko stood between Lavinia and Kensuke, silent. Chris made a mental note to track the girl down later. There was a hollowness to her gaze that they did not recognize, liked even less than the way her face seemed to crumple into itself with every moment in Lavinia's company. Yes, they'd have to look for her later. Have a chat. Not that anyone with half a soul could tolerate Lavinia's presence. What a wretched creature, Chris thought. As much as they wanted to intervene, however, now wasn't the time or place. Chris had their own problems to contend with. That said, these problems didn't need to stay problems. Sparing one last pitying look in Michiko's direction, Chris returned their attention to the pair beside them, their grin already growing. Anton, Cassia growled. Chris! The Herat was taller than the Rumicon, almost comically debonair in appearance. Dark hair, elegant features, a pencil-thin mustache, and a trim goatee to match. He wore his tresses impractically long, and even here, amid all the finery of Toifé, Chris could picture Anton's mane streaming through the wind.
You've returned to us.
Anton! Anton draped an arm across Chris's shoulders, beaming. They looked him over again and swore to themselves they'd procure an introduction to the captain's tailor. His ensemble dazzled with its idiosyncratic style, its unwillingness to adhere to any standards but those set by the beating heart of the Blue Fang.
So, as I was saying, it was a battle like none other. There I was, dangling from the ship by the thinnest of ropes. The wind roared around us.
Prove it. What? Prove to me that you're that agile. Chris flashed a mischievous grin.
What? Right now? Here?
Don't you dare encourage him. Yes, right the hell now. Chris crossed their arms across their chest. There was movement in the periphery of their vision. A quick glance revealed Bologna swaggering through the guests, loudly introducing Penelope and Ojo to every unfortunate whose path they crossed. Chris cocked their head, gaze sliding to the mug dangling loosely from her fingers. Their smile grew. This would be fun. Don't even think about it. Cassia had finally had enough. She shouldered between the two of them, an arm raised.
Both of you. But, darling, both of you. Behave. Or I swear I will have your heads mounted on a pike so quickly, neither of you will even have time to bleed.
What is she doing?
No. Oh, Bologna. Is that...
Oh, dear. Chris followed Cassia's stricken gaze back to where Bologna stood, now cradling a massive tome. Try as they might, Chris couldn't quite hear what the Mertican was jabbering on about, but the strained look on Penelope's face suggested that it could be nothing good.
Is she doing what I think she's doing?
Anton laughed, a brandy-warm noise.
Oh, she is doing what I think she's doing.
This is a disaster. And that idiot. What's going on? Chris asked. As Cassia stalked toward her counterpart, Anton, smiling like the cat who'd found his way into a bottle of cream, pointed toward the book in Bellona's grip.
That's a registry of dead Merticans. Notice the colors, the trimming on the spine. They're quite a common sight at weddings, funerals, baby showers. Everyone in Mertica gets excited when the book comes out. After all, who doesn't like to daydream about which dead hero might become your newborn child?
Chapter 7. Michiko. Michiko staggered from the party, listing ancestors under her breath, her inventory of the dead enumerated chronologically. She thanked them, in turn, for the miracle she hadn't expected, a release from Lavinia's scrutiny. That murderous bastard. In her mind's eye, Michiko could still see Lavinia looming over him, her, still taste the backwash of tin in her mouth. How dare she? Michiko exhaled, sagging against a wall. How dare Lavinia ask that of her? She'd always known that the Merticans would request unsavory actions of her, but this was to impede the ascension of a warder for no other reason than spite, to cultivate discord in a small nation only just finding its wings. Something about that felt blasphemous to Michiko. It was one thing to curtail the movements of a rival, but to strangle the growth of a fledgling country? Never mind the fact that Kensuke had ordered her to fight in his stead, or the political insult that this would represent to Rumika. A warder declining to attend the gauntlet. It was unheard of. Not unless the country intended war. But what authority did she have to judge her superiors? And who was she to come up against a monster like Lavinia? Michiko coerced a smile into position as two servitors, homunculi of clay, held together by bladecraft and something older than Toifei, jittered past, their glowing eyes wafting across her form. Somewhere in the rear of her thoughts, Michiko could feel the Golden Lord, her grandfather, she still couldn't believe it, whispering inchoately, his rage thrumming in her veins. Damn him. Damn everyone involved. Michiko pushed from the wall and began marching down the corridor, occasionally testing the doors to see which would give. Eventually, one relented to her questing hands. Michiko ducked into a small room piled with tarp-covered boxes, its air dense with dust. Good enough, she thought. With trembling hands, she gathered the items she needed, only to realize again, with growing terror, that her grandfather was likely unaccustomed to waiting. His voice roared in her ears. That beast! Grandfather, that useless fool! I remember when they were more honorable. In those days, the Merticans understood the concept of nobility. Nothing like these greedy rodents, these demons, these... Halfway through his diatribe, the Golden Lord switched to a Kakute dialect that she did not recognize, older even than the patois that her grand aunt spoke. She sighed. Foolish, old, backward thinking. A litany of Mertican criticisms repeated themselves, all pitched with that same lilt. A gentle yet loving disdain, as though of a parent discussing the mistakes of their least favorite son. At the same time, Michiko couldn't help the frisson of recognition, or the ache that followed. So many years of being told to look forward, to erase what she was. I won't stand for it. Do not stand for this insult. The Golden Lord churned in her thoughts, no more than a gasp, like the echo of words never spoken. But despite their ephemeral quality, he had a kind of vivid potency the other ancestors lacked. He hissed in her ears, a smell of incense pluming through the air. In my days, we would not ask the delegates of a conquered kingdom to assist in such nefariousness. Open combat, now, that's how we would do it. War is honest. And that's why we are now a dominion of Mertica, Michiko thought, deep in that part of her that she kept for her own. But she said nothing aloud. Michiko knelt down, hands resting on her thighs, and sieved through the murmurs of the other ancestors, subsumed by the Golden Lord's rage. No one had anything constructive to add to the discussion. Her other forebearers were furious at his monopoly. "This isn't up to me."
Take off Lavinia's head. The Merticans understand a coup.
His suggestion startled a laugh from her. "You understand that isn't possible, right? There is no way. Lavinia is one of the best blade crafters in the Empire, and—"
"You are my granddaughter,"
the Golden Lord snarled. The words thundered through her marrow, filled the rooms of her lungs, and Michiko swallowed against a sudden vertigo.
"You are of my line. You have the blood of kings and heroes, legends beyond compare. And you'd bow your head before you even unsheathed your sword?"
"I would," said Michiko, "because unlike you, I'm still alive. More important, grandfather, and I say this with all due respect, you don't know Lavinia. You don't understand the danger she poses. If you truly cared about your kingdom, you wouldn't have gotten yourself captured," she thought. "You would listen to me."
"What is your suggestion?"
Michiko took a breath and told him. Chapter 8. Ojo. Was a bit of a louse, apparently, but she knew how to fight, and that, I imagine, is the most important thing for a Vanian, isn't it? Bellona grinned winsomely. An ambassadorial aide stood beside her, slumping under gifts for Penelope, every last one of them not so much collected but coerced from a donor. As predicted, it had been a spectacle. The ability to fight, to strategize, to turn the tides of a battle in their favor, that is the Vanian credo. Ojo watched as Penelope studied the table of names, before calmly flicking her eyes up to meet Bellona's own. Her smile had remained the same throughout the whole tone-deaf affair, a pleasantly neutral expression without so much as a crack in its facade, that was, nonetheless, terrifying enough to chase grown men from its presence.
"Yes, it is. I hope you will have a hero for a child." "Her heart is in the right place,"
Ojo reflected. The wine, at least, was palatable.
"All Vanian women become heroines in their own right. Such is the nature of their nation."
"Yes, but—" Bellona hesitated. "Yes, but what I meant was, Warder Kante, I hope that Warder Kirkos will have a Mertican hero for a child. Which is not to imply that the legends of the other islands are lesser for their nationalities, but good Merticans are driven, ambitious, committed to pursuing a goal across lifetimes. Can you imagine what might happen if one were to have a child born of a Vanian battle mistress and a Mertican soul? The glory of such a union—"
"I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I feel the need to ask. Given border restrictions and the rules that Mertica has regarding foreigners giving birth on their soil, how do you expect that might happen?"
Penelope said as she tilted her head. "Why, that's simple. I will tell the Mertican government to issue you a birth visa. You will be treated with the highest honors. There are special residences designated for pregnant—" Ojo almost pitied her. The corner of Penelope's lips raised by a fraction.
"And I imagine you've spoken about this with Lavinia?"
At the mention of her name, Lavinia, regal as a tigress, extricated herself from the press of whispering onlookers. Her eyes lingered on Penelope for a moment, before she directed her scathing gaze at the inebriated Bellona. "Has the little kitten been troubling you, warders?"
"No, not at all. Bellona was extending an unexpected amount of kindness, in fact,"
Penelope replied. "Was she now? They grew up so fast. What kind of kindness are we talking about? Has she absolved you of the sin of consorting with lesser beings? So few are worthy of you, Vanians." Now, Lavinia turned her attention to Ojo, her smile feline. "Wouldn't you agree, Ojo?"
"Absolutely. But thankfully she learned the requirements of her station and moved on from your company to better things."
To Ojo's delight, the jab found its mark. Lavinia's expression constricted before it smoothed again, but not entirely. Ojo could see the fault lines now, a tracery of fine lines signaling the warder's discontent. He smiled, then ran his fingers along the hilt of his short sword. Ojo despised his ceremonial armament, loathed its frippery. The additional weight slowed him, spoiled the elegance of his blade crafting. It was an encumbrance, yet also a compulsory evil. If nothing else, it kept Lavinia from using her blades on him. Always the joker, Ojo. Ojo, never Warder Kante, Never anything that might denote even a sliver of respect. Lavinia plucked the book from Bellona's grasp and riffled through its pages, her eyebrows arched. For her part, Penelope remained serene, eyes lidded, even drowsy, her smile thin. Now, honestly, what happened here? Too late, the gravity of her earlier proposition appeared to have sunk in. Bellona's eyes were wide, pupils thin to pinholes. Her terror was palpable. What happened, Bellona? I made a joke about giving birth on Mertican soil, Penelope said. Bellona was compassionate enough to entertain my foolishness. Wasn't she, Ojo?
Indeed.
Ojo inclined his head.
In spite of her awareness that such a thing was virtually an impossibility, she attended to the questions of her superior without complaint. She even brought out the book when she asked. I can only imagine how utterly mortified she must have been to deal with our stupidity.
I'm delighted. Lavinia dropped a palm atop Bellona's head. The gesture, though there would be some who construed it as affectionate, was unmistakably an attempt to injure. Ojo saw the younger Mertican flinch, a flicker of anguish quickly extinguished. Lavinia curled her fingers, nails biting into the other woman's scalp. What a credit to our nation she is. And here I thought she might have done something unbearably stupid, like promise that she might secure Penelope a visa normally reserved for the most faithful of our colonial subjects.
You heard wrong,
Ojo declared flatly.
Perhaps you should consider visiting the clinic in Toifé. I hear the physician is exquisitely gifted at dealing with the ailments of the ear.
Penelope yawned like a cat. That's good. A flash of white teeth, and Lavinia shoved Bellona's head down, her expression still crocodilian. Apologize to them anyway. I'm certain that you've made a misstep in some way, regardless. Warder Kirkos, Warder Kante. You have my apologies for any inconvenience I may have caused as a result of my ineptitude. Bellona ground the words between her teeth. I hope to be a more worthy example of Mertika's grand traditions and— Oh! Lavinia's fingers twisted into Bellona's hair, tugging hard, a sharp jolt of motion that contorted the latter's face into a grimace. Penelope and Ojo exchanged looks, before the Kulo warder strode forward, his fingers touching to the knob of Lavinia's wrist.
That's enough.
Such familiarity, Ojo.
Toifé, if you recall, is a place of peace, a place to communicate without fear of aggression. Bellona might be a citizen of Mertika, but she is also a denizen of this city-state. So long as she stands on this soil, she is entitled to the same privileges you enjoy, Lavinia. I hope you're all right with that.
Why ever would I not be? Lavinia released her grip, stroked the back of her fingers across Ojo's shirt, leaving a cross-hatching of vermilion. She tipped her chin up. Bellona said nothing throughout, only held herself with a soldier's rigidity, seemingly oblivious to the rill of blood wandering down her hairline.
I've no idea.
Ojo bared his teeth.
You've been nothing but a model of compassion, after all.
I'm so flattered that you've noticed. I'd hate to be thought of as something I'm not. The pink edge of a tongue lapped over her lips. Something like a murderer who's dreamed himself a savior of the unfortunate, the poor. Unlike some parties, I believe in honesty. Ojo stiffened, an objection on the cusp of birth. Another faint smile, timbre abruptly adjusted for jocularity. So, who did Bellona recommend during this exercise in foolishness? Was it Senator Fukuda? General Koyabashi? So many possibilities. How could anyone choose? I can't imagine. Tell me, Penelope, who would you want for a child? Someone who would make Ojo and Semele proud one day. Lavinia slammed the book shut. Ojo jumped, startled by Penelope's reply. Of all the things that he'd expected, that was not one of them. But the battle mistress's gaze stayed cool when it met his, bereft of anything but a subtle affability. No different than the emotion she projected when conversing with Lavinia. Atul, then, his name, evoked to skewer Lavinia's soul. No more significant than the letter opener that Penelope kept by her bedside. My, oh my, Lavinia purred. I never thought I'd see the day, but I suppose it was inevitable. Vanya has suffered from these days of peace, hasn't it? No more reason to keep its battle mistresses quite as sharp.
Whatever makes you happiest to think, Lavinia,
said Penelope. Quite. Lavinia's mouth pinched into a line. By the way, Ojo, how is Kulot doing nowadays? Ojo did not miss a beat. He had been waiting for that.
As well as any country might, under its circumstances.
Really? The Mertican warder widened her eyes, tossed the book into Bellona's waiting arms, and heeled closer to Ojo. She smelled of frangipani and iron, flowers and blood. Her voice became husky. That is delightful. I'd expected a vastly different answer. I must see about acquiring new sources.
Wise decision, Ojo countered. Mertika does often rely too much on its traditions. A little bit of perspective wouldn't go amiss.
A little bit of Kuloi wisdom? I'm touched. She palmed her chest. I'd have thought you'd have been pickier about sharing such things with me, but I suppose beggars cannot be choosers. Or maybe, her smile grew into a dagger, maybe you're simply trying to build a bridge between our countries. Mertika and Kulot are due to get closer any day. Penelope started forward.
That's enough, Lavinia.
I am but a humble servant of the guilds. I wouldn't presume to be able to speak about the future before first convening with my betters. We do things differently. But assuming what you say is the truth, I imagine that Kulot will, despite the circumstances, find a way to make the best of the situation. Kulot will always find a way. A hand brushed Ojo's shoulder. He glanced sidelong. It was Yokno, bedecked in his usual uniform.
Yes, old friend.
The seneschal pointed a finger upward. For as long as Ojo had known him, the man had never been anything but decorous, anything but exquisitely composed. Today, however, his saturnine features bore a faint but discernible distress. In a quiet voice, he said,
I hate to interrupt, but would it be possible for someone to tell me why there is a Herok swinging on the chandelier?
You're listening to Born to the Blade, Episode 3, by Cassandra Kah, starring Exie Sands. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. Born to the Blade is created by Michael R. Underwood and written by Michael R. Underwood, Marie Brennan, Cassandra Kah, and Malka Older. It is executive produced by Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.